Welcome back to the Black Film Allegiance Table Talk series. I am here this morning with Areej Noor, who's coming to us live from Cairo. And it's such a pleasure to have you, Areej. Thank you.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. And specifically, I'm interested in talking a little bit about your production company. Is that right? Statement Films. Can you just sort of tell us a little bit about your overall premise and what you do in the film industry, so to speak?
Absolutely. So Statement Films is a company that I launched with my executive team about 6 months ago. So it's a COVID baby. It's a company that develops, produces, and finances content for film and television, created, directed, written by African and diaspora women. I would say, and we'll get into this more, we refer to ourselves as a media company, but I think eventually what will happen is we will occupy a space between a studio and an agency and perhaps encompass both as the African content boom continues to kind of do its thing and the company grows. So right now we refer to ourselves sometimes as startup studio, depending on who we talk to, but it's really just a media company that's growing.
Yeah, and so much growth. I mean, you refer to it as like the African content boom. I mean, tell us what your sort of perception is of the landscape of like African cinema and how that relates to the West and the streamers and that type of environment right now.
Of course. So basically what's happening on the continent right now is we really are living through a historic period in the sense that you're seeing incredible talent finally sort of find a way to make itself known to the world. The African sort of new wave is here. I know people overuse that term, but it really is. There are incredible auteurs on the continent as well as creatives from all mediums, every type of art form. But in cinema specifically, and content specifically for television, what we're seeing is, a lot of, first of all, just generally speaking, looking at what's going on the continent. The middle class is growing. It's a very young continent that's hungry for content. The average age, 19 years old. We have over 500 million internet users on the continent. Data is cheaper, internet is getting faster. So there's real infrastructure for subscription on-demand services to reach people by mobile, through other devices. And so in that sense, there's been sort of a democratization of access. But then you also see that, with that, you have international, mainly American streaming companies kind of expanding east. A lot of the markets that they have been in for the last several years are becoming saturated in the West. So you see a lot more development in Asia and Africa and Latin America. And what that means is Netflix, for instance, has a really strong ground game on the continent, but Disney Plus is already there, partnering with animation, studios. They're partnered with one in South Africa. They're already working on shows. HBO Max International is coming, Apple, Amazon, and the like. So there's so much sort of activity around the fact that, wow, like distribution is all of a sudden not an issue. And so creators have an incredible opportunity. And I'm not saying that streamers are the only way to go, but they're definitely changing what's possible, even in terms of a company like ours that is raising financing to invest in content that we then sell to streamers and post-COVID, hopefully have great theatrical releases, et cetera, for our films. Saying to an investor, hey, look at all of these brands that are in the space and buying the content, it makes a difference. I mean, in terms of, one more thing, Justice, yeah. I want to really, so much of what we do is building investor confidence at this stage in African content. We are in a boom, like I said, and like you were asking, but also I think people need to understand, and not to use a colonial word, but it is sort of like a frontier situation, and I've heard people recently in a meeting the other night, someone referred to it as sort of what India was like in the 90s. And I know, Jack Ma in a editorial in the Times a couple of years ago, I think in 2019 or 2020, made some comparisons between China in the 90s and Africa now. So it's really, a situation where people want to get in, they want to get in early because this thing is going to grow so fast. I mean, we're expecting revenues in streaming alone to top over $1 billion by 2023.
Right.
So it's a fast changing situation.
Yeah. I love that you're really like approaching this from that financial side, from that business side, and like having a perspective, towards what's happening, the valuation of the industry and how much money is being spent, and just seeing that kind of bubble through that lens. I think a lot of creatives have a hard time seeing that, and having that sort of business acumen that's essential to that. So knowing that Statement Films is sort of championing auteurs and creatives in that space is really special and important work. How much do you feel like there's a threat from, and I don't know about threat, but sort of the threat of negligence sometimes, or not, but like around the content shifting when you have these kinds of streamers coming in? Do we have all of that authentic voice when we have these large American companies, or do you see them more as, this is the opportunity and this is how we actually get our voice to those platforms? And I know that your space isn't in creating as much as it is some of this other business stuff, but what's your sense from the folks who are sort of part of your network and Statement Films?
I mean, we do heavy development on our projects, and I'll tell you about that in a bit. We are very much on the creative side of it, but I think I'm thinking about two things regarding your question. I mean, look, are there bad deals being made on the continent right now with these streamers? Yes, there's no way around it. There are, I've heard stories of streamers sort of approaching broadcasters and saying, for this sort of piece of this soap opera or this show that we want to license and put on our streamer for you, we're going to pay you something very, very low. And, people aren't very happy with some of the deals that are being presented to them. And I think that is something that unfortunately is to be expected. I mean, it has a lot to do with the larger ecosystem of how stuff gets made on the continent. And this also goes for the Middle East. We don't have, like, for instance, there's no talent representation infrastructure really in Africa. I mean, you have some talent agencies in South Africa. You might have some in other huge entertainment hubs like Nigeria, but there's hardly an entertainment, like a talent representation infrastructure that can go in and broker these deals for you. There's also no producers guild, there are no writers guilds. There are no bodies that represent the talent that can really go to bat for them when it's time to negotiate. So yes, a lot of people are taking the deals that are available to them. And so, like any sort of new and emerging situation, we're all watching and taking notes. But I think once everyone else is in and their teams are on the continent and they're capacity building, they're making relationships with the producers, with the creators, with the directors, I think that competition is going to force the streamers to basically do better and come up with numbers that people find more fair than what's currently going on. It's still early days, Justice. I really want to emphasize that. I think in 2-3 years, this will be a vastly different space. And this is something that we at Statement are really excited about because, we want to help architect what that space looks like and make it fair and equitable and inspiring for people to kind of want to work in the space. But there's a lot of work to do.
There's an obvious sort of history, exploitation of African resources. And I think that's definitely something that the streamers sort of can represent, or not just the streamers, but just in general, that sort of foreign influence into the creative space. And I do hope we can sort of move forward.
That is something that we talk about in every single meeting. Yeah, it is a very sort of post-colonial film industry on the continent. So much of the film industry, what it is, you know, a lot of films that have done well and gone on to do, you know, great things on the international festival circuit and gotten a lot of attention are films that have been soft financed basically by European money. And, you know, we hear this figure kind of being thrown around by people who know that, you know, it's safe to say that the majority of African cinema IP over the last 40 years is owned by Europeans, right? And it's a problem on many levels. And, you know, I don't need to get into how this is an issue basically for just representation of the continent and who owns and who gets to tell Africa's stories. Put that aside. It creates a situation where people like myself, when I go in and say, look, there's business here, there's money to be made, so invest in the content so we can see that happen, but invest in the creators to tell their own stories and to own a piece of their films when all is said and done. You know, like, let's start creating and cultivating an actual industry and move out of this post-colonial soft financing sort of paradigm. It's, you know, it's people are like, yes, no, we know, and we want that to be the case, but then, you know, execution isn't always there. And I think, you know, people like to talk a big game about, no, we understand. And even just like the producers on the continent sharing information with each other, getting out of their silos to understand, what are you getting paid for this? What did the sales agent give you for this? How are you able to get it, you know, your film to this broadcasting company in this European country, or just basic information that we did, you know, a lot of enterprising research to even build a business strategy and a model to be able to do what we do. People are not super forthcoming with information.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a straightforward journey at all with this, but the numbers don't lie.
Right. Yeah. I think it's really, I mean, that experience of not necessarily information being shared, I think can be replicated in many different parts of the Black experience, right? Of course, you know, we've been put against each other in so many different places. And I mean, that's actually one thing that I love, like, listening to you speak, Areej, is you refer to cinema on the African continent and African film. And I think that it's like, I mean, so often Africa is sort of like described as this monolith, right? Where it's just like, oh, African things and Africa, you know, and I hear you speaking and know that there's not that monolithic understanding like behind your experience, of course, because you're living in Cairo. Most of your life has been spent on the continent, from my understanding. And, you know, so how do you see diving in? How do those specifics work? I know South Africa is a lot of sort of the first stop, right? A lot of the first touchdown is like in South Africa. They're more developed and like other things like that. And in your experience, the goal of statement films, what's the film industry like in Cairo? And, you know, do you see that? Is it just like Cairo, Nairobi, Lagos, and South Africa, or are there other markets in there as well that are producing content? What's sort of your experience like as we break down within that? Are there going to be different industries? Like, you know what I mean? We have Atlanta, and then we've got LA, then we got New York, you know what I mean? And that's just one country. So let's not like, wrap our heads and like use that. So Africa is not a country. So you see just sort of like how will this scale up over these next couple of years? And what do you think is happening within the continent in that way?
So much. I mean, yeah. So the biggest, film and content markets on the continent are South Africa and Nigeria. And then after that, Kenya is where you're seeing a lot of movement. The creative economy in Kenya is something that is developing, that's super exciting, like in terms of fashion, in terms of food, in terms of cinema, in terms of a lot of things. South Africa, obviously very established. They have incredible it's beautiful, the amount of just talent that's coming out of there right now, the projects that we're looking at that are coming out. They've got some great producers there. And one of our strategic partner companies, Aruku Media, is there, and they pump out some incredible art house cinema. They've been doing this for over a decade. South Africa is a great place to kind of know that when you're engaging with producers there, writers there, you're going to be seeing some projects that are just really hard to walk away from. You're going to want to get involved. And a lot of amazing women coming out of South Africa that, my company is so excited about. And I have an all-women executive team. So there's, they get excited. We get excited about our ladies. And then, of course, Nigeria and Nollywood is just huge. And I think you're seeing a lot of really great stuff come out of there now. I think there's a lot more global facing content coming out of Nigeria that is super exciting. Mo Abudu just did, she has a huge deal with Netflix, and I love Ebony Life Productions and what they do there. So I think Nigeria is also entering a really exciting new chapter. Kenya, you don't see as much infrastructure as you do in South Africa and Nigeria for filmmaking. I think that there are some production companies here and there that do some really interesting things. There are amazing producers out of Kenya, though. The ecosystem, though, is something that I'm excited to see develop more. We had, I think, Maya Lecco and Chris King at our event in January for Statement, and they, their film was an Oscar entry this year. You have other amazing producers like Tony Kamau and Judy Kabinge, and there's just a lot of people doing amazing things. The head of Netflix Africa Originals is actually Kenyan, Dorothy Katuba, who's also a wonderful producer. So those are sort of the markets that people look at, that they have kind of numbers on, et cetera. Now, outside of what's going on, and I'm talking about sub-Saharan, I'll move on to the North next. But, I think, then there are just other countries that there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. Like right now, there are some really great filmmakers coming out of, Francophone West Africa, Senegal, the Ivory Coast. You see really interesting things happening in Central Africa. I think it's really the one of the challenges that we have on the continent is outside of these hubs that I mentioned, the three, West, East, and South, you have the rest of sub-Saharan Africa where there are beautiful artists sort of coming out of there, but they don't necessarily easily plug into one of these hubs where their work can get developed. They can make the right connections. And I know that, for instance, our strategic partner, Elias Ribeiro of Aruku Media, and Kate Panzagru, who's also an owner at Aruku Media, and Asanda is the other partner, they just launched something called Producer Indaba, which is basically a 1-year program to cultivate the producer ecosystem on the continent. And they got an amazing sort of group of people from around the continent, and even co-producers from Europe that are interested in producing African content. So you're seeing people kind of come together and say, okay, what can we rally around? How can we bring all these people together and kind of like elevate with each other and like do the work that needs to be done to get these films made? That's all happening now. And I think you're going to see a lot more of those efforts, because the issue is just there's no rallying point. There are amazing people doing things in different pockets, but What we need is a cohesive system where people are committed to getting 4 films, 5 films a year out. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like here, there, and whatever, instead of maybe, you know, some of what's happened in the past is just, you know, a producer will go to film school in the West, come back, make one movie, all their effort kind of goes there, and the larger picture may get lost. So I think in terms of North Africa, though, there, you know, it's a bit of a different game in the sense that Egypt, for instance, where I am, has an over 100-year-old beautiful cinematic history. I grew up watching Egyptian cinema as a young child in Washington, D.C. I perfected my Arabic with these films. I grew up with these films. Literally everything I watched was black and white for years. So I don't know anything about the stars here now, but if you ask me about the 60s and the 70s and the 50s, I can give you all their names.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. It's odd, but you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, for me, a lot of what motivates me is that I was in college exposed to specifically Ousmane Sembène and like other Senegalese, you know, filmmakers from that same era in the 50s and the 60s, and, you know, often regarded as the first filmmakers in sub-Saharan Africa. And, you know, that's what was inspiring to me. And now, you know, similarly, I mean, I'm like 1 out of every 5 to 10 references. Does anybody have any idea who Ousmane Sembène is? You know, and so you're just like, okay, that's a disconnect, which is part of why, you know, I wanted to even create this table talk series so that we can start having those dialogues from history to what's happening now and sort of understanding how all that stuff is linked. And I really, I love that Pan-African, you know, perspective. I want to ask a little bit, like, Statement Films is focused on female creatives. And, you know, what sort of, playing not devil's advocate, but I mean, I have some ideas why that would be important, but to you, why is that important? There's obviously tons of creatives who need their voice, you know, exposed on the continent, and so your focus on women is super important. And how do you feel like that connects, just sort of culturally? Why is that important? And, you know, within the culture of cinema, within the, you know, cultures within the African continent that you may be working within, or that these creatives are coming from, why is that sort of important to champion those female voices for you?
I mean, it comes from a very personal place for me, but I'll start with saying that, you know, in terms of just the overall question of cultural production, who has access to means, who has access to the time, you know, women are always getting the short end of the stick. You know what I mean? These are just basic questions of economics, labor, you know, gender roles. And it's no different when it comes to producing art, you know, when it comes to filmmaking. Women don't have the time to schmooze and, you know, sort of network with people and get, you know, their projects, advance their projects, develop their projects. They're at home with the kids. They are working 2 jobs and at home with the kids. It's harder for them to access financing, you know, and that's a universal story. So, you know, I am so deeply committed to seeing these women win. And I just know that this, you know, the work that is out there that they're making, just, you know, it's breathtaking. What I've had the privilege to see over the course of even just the last year from the continent, it just takes my breath away. And so that's why we exist. And I will say that in terms of an origin story, the company is a company run by 30-something dynamic, brilliant women from different sides of the entertainment industry globally. You know, that between us, we have expertise in financing, production, development, et cetera. And it's a we span the African diaspora. Pumi, the head of business development, is South African, as the creative director is Kenyan based, but she's Sudanese, Somali, grew up in France. And then we have Lila, I like to say our Swedish Jewish princess, who is our head of creative development, who is based in LA like Pumi is, but is between New York and LA. And we've all bring our experiences, our heartbreaks in this industry, our endless inspiration, our dreams. And, we put that into statement every single day, and we do it to uplift and make heard the stories from women who inspire us, which is the best place for us to channel all of that. At this point, some of us have had 15, 12, 10 years of work experience after school. I mean, we've been around the block. We kind of know what happens here, and we know how difficult it is for women in this industry. And we all have different stories about how and why we know that are very personal for us. So, people can go on and on about the numbers and women, they have a hard time. Yeah, that stuff is true. But then if you know it for yourself from your own experience, then it becomes a spiritual thing, then that's your calling. Who knows what statement will grow into, this is just the beginning of our journey. But yeah, we're here for the ladies, and, it's nice. It's nice to be able to wake up and do that every day.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I love that. Our calling is spiritual. And as an artist, I can definitely attest to that, right? Like where my work goes, where I'm called, the things that I'm passionate about, and even being in this sort of bridge role, having spent so much time on the continent, especially in my formidable creative years in my 20s. And now, sort of seeing what's happening with this boom and just really helping to broker that conversation. I think even a lot of Black Americans, we need that conversation. We need to help turn our eye to African cinema and understand that there's so much content to be respected that's coming off of there in general. And it's just such an important space. And hopefully that Pan-African vision can kind of extend into the diaspora as part of this boom, and that all of this content will.
I think it is. Yeah. I honestly think it already is.
Yeah.
I think the transatlantic conversation is, afoot. Like we're watching it. And I think as you were talking, I think it is so important, you know what I mean? To bridge the two. That's definitely at the center of everything we do. I am American. I was born and raised in the States. My friends sometimes are like, really? I'm like, yes. From DC. Right. Both my parents are Somali, so I'm first generation. But I was also going to say, Justice, that was my big takeaway from Black Panther, right? That film, we could talk about it for days, but what did I take away from it? It was that conversation that was happening between the brothers, that African, that pain,
Definitely.
And I was deeply emotional about it for days about that in particular. Because
so well done. I think, of course, like you said, we could talk for a long time about that, but for Ryan Coogler and for that whole creative team to step in and really say, look, we're not going to tell this story to Americans about this without addressing that sort of relationship between the continent and between the Black American, that I've been left behind, you're looking at the ship going away. There's so much symbolism there. And I think.
And I know he went to Africa to, they did their research and they really,
right.
And to do it with that kind of a sort of platform, and to do it, like you're saying, so masterfully, and so painfully, it's very evocative, the whole thing, it was beautiful. But I think that in a lot of ways that really kind of brought things together for a lot of people. And, I think when historians write about the period that we're in, that I think will be a marker. Right.
Yeah. So I just want to, again, thank you so much for telling your story and where you are in the industry. And I know that you have a million different things going on behind the scenes with Statement Films, but just to kind of finish this conversation with like your near future. What are the next steps for you that you feel comfortable sharing here? I know you're just like developing partnerships. You have, support for your creatives that you're working with. I am envious of how brilliant and aggressive and assertive you are with like reaching out in just such a short time that you've had Statement Films. What do you feel like you can share with this community around what are the next steps for like a business focused kind of media company like Statement Films?
So like you're saying, Justice, partnerships are key. I think that, people would be surprised, or maybe not surprised, how many just incredible people want to be involved with something like this. So we have strategic partnerships around the world. We have Aruku Media as our African strategic partner, the primary one. We love them. Hi, Aruku. In the States, we're partnered with the Mission Entertainment, which that's Andrew Cole's company, producers of Queen and Slim, and a lot of other amazing stuff. With the Mission Entertainment, we are currently planning a creative retreat for African women creators in Hawaii, where the Mission is now opening a campus. So that's going to be exciting. A week or two with some fabulous women, bringing them together to collaborate, mingle, complain together,
Beautiful.
commiserate.
Yes, get it. Beautiful. Yeah.
So we're really excited about that. We have a creators report that we are hard at work on that we're going to put out, I think, biannually of African women creators to watch that include women on the continent, but also diaspora African women creators. We're so excited, and that'll span television creators, filmmakers, but also comedians and, other types of artists. And it'll be very cool to kind of put the statement stamp on that. And that'll be a report that we will use to kind of introduce ourselves to the world, to a lot of companies in the States. What else do we have going on? Jesus, it's a lot.
That's a lot. It's a lot. That's plenty. Yeah.
Yeah, it's, we've got an event series that we're partnered on with the Africa Institute in Sharjah, founded by the founder of the Sharjah Art Foundation, head of the Sharjah Biennial, Sheikh Ahuri Qasimi, and the director, Salah Hassan, who's a, collaborator of Oakley and Wazors. He's an incredible curator. Salah is a, African art historian, and all these things based between Cornell, I think, and Sharjah. So their Africa Institute with us will be co-curating a series, I think, of 2 or 3 events in the late spring, early summer, with filmmakers, asking questions a lot, kind of like this conversation today, about what are the prospects and impediments of the Africa film industry, bringing in people from the older generations, talking to us younger people, and disagreeing, agreeing,
Sure, of course.
I hope you'll come to that. But there's a lot happening. But I'm so excited about, the Table Talk series. And thank you so much for inviting me. And I really appreciate it, Justice. This is great. Keep doing what you're doing and keep us, in the loop. And
of course. And thank you too. And my last question is just like, if you're a young female creative in the diaspora or on the continent, like how can they interface with Statement Films? Are you on social? Is there a mailing list? How can people be involved?
So we are on social. So I'm so terrible at this. My creative director would laugh at me. It's at Statement_Films on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Actually, our website is www.statement-films.com. There's contact information there for our creative department. You can email us. They have been taking meetings with all kinds of amazing women, both in the States and on the continents.
Beautiful.
And we are the opposite of gatekeepers. If there's one last thing I can leave you with, that is something that the entire team really can't stand, specifically within this industry. We really don't subscribe to that. And as much as we grow, and we plan to grow a lot, that's something we never want to be. So please feel like you can approach us on social, email us, be in contact with us. We want to know what you're working on. And, we also are connectors. So if it's something that we can't, get involved in, or, there isn't a place for us with, we can definitely refer you to other people. And we've really kind of been developing that for months now. And so ladies, be in touch.
That's beautiful. It's such important work, Areej, and thank you for the work, and thank you for being here. That's awesome.
Thank you.
And, yeah, cool.
And good morning.
Good morning, bright and early. Peace, Cairo. We love you. All right.
Thank
Talk to you soon.